The MonsterVerse has received a lot of flack for a lot of things, namely the retcons, but this is one of those that is simply not the case. Toho's stance of not thinking of Godzilla as a species has been very much a point of contention in the community, and unfortunately because of the hyperbolic nature of a lot of video making, this has gotten heavily distorted, and even the original statement is so far removed from context and likely even translations, we don't actually know what they were talking about. Which is why today we are going to be covering Godzilla as a species and why he isn't alone. And the unfortunate blaming of Toho for a retcon that doesn't actually exist, because while there have been many retcons in the MonsterVerse, this just simply isn't one of them, and I want to put the facts straight. This is unfortunately the result of content creators taking the absolute worst possible interpretations of something completely devoid of context, as well as the fact that Legendary isn't exactly clear on a lot of things when talking to us because they have to talk in a lot of vagaries for, well, the interests of the series. Because even something as much as the wording and even the statement itself that is often touted, we don't even know if that's real or what the exact phrasing is. So this is almost exclusively speculation on a possible rumor. And we are going to be, well, aggressively ripping into this thing and actively tearing it down today. So if you guys enjoy what you see here, the Colossal Kaiju content and more things like this, don't forget to subscribe for more and comment your thoughts below on this entire situation. So, the groundwork padding for basically what the entire topic of today is the statement or believed statement from Toho to Legendary about Godzilla should not be thought of as a species. Because there are two entirely divergent ends of what this statement could mean, and we'll be going over the absolute doomer interpretation of this, which is Godzilla is a singular anomaly kaiju and there is absolutely nothing like him. He is a unique organism, and there are things that only resemble him, but he is not of a species. And the idea of Titanus Gojira is simply Monarch not knowing a thing about the kaiju, with things like Dagon being retconned into not actually being relatives of Godzilla, but just simply looking like him. That the Godzilla versus the Kongs war was just Godzilla single-handedly fighting all of the Kongs, or it was the Godzilla look-alike species fighting the Kongs and Godzilla had absolutely nothing to do with it, which actively conflicts with everything we have seen. And then there is the exact opposite end, which is that Godzilla is simply an atypical example of his own species, and that it simply means Toho does not want Legendary to pad out the series with other members of Godzilla's own species, to focus exclusively on the Big G. No double, triple Titanus Gojira tag team-ups. And that Godzilla is simply an atypical apex example of his own species. And to refrain from going into detail on the Titanus Gojira species as a whole. Personally, I think it falls in between these two, leaning more charitably towards the non-doomer take on this, because as we know, content creators gotta content create. And nothing quite gets in views like rage. Largely because Dagon is still a Titanus Gojira. Contrary to popular belief, that was never retconned. The entire idea that there exists this Toho Force retcon is not actually real. And before anyone mentions anything about, well, the author writers do this, and the novelization writers have these differences, the novelizations of the movies are not canon to the MonsterVerse. The reason is, one, there is already a large number of conflicts in the continuity of the novelizations and the movies. A lot of discrepancies. Second, if you are going to take those discrepancies and excuse many of them as just being hand-waved away, and focusing on comments made about those novelizations, you are embracing discrepancies while rejecting others. It is specifically cherry-picking examples to support one side of an argument. That inherently shows a massive contradiction in logic. You're saying I am rejecting 99% of all these things, but this one is correct. So any comments involving novelizations, yeah, not really something to be taken seriously. Case in point, saying that Monarch helped to develop the Oxygen Destroyer in King of the Monsters novelization, when, oh boy, Monarch didn't know about it until it was used in the King of the Monsters movie. It's a pretty glaring discrepancy. For as many problems as Godzilla Aftershocks has, it shows additional Godzilla species members. That there is a history of the Muto Prime predating on the Titanus Gojira species. And as we have seen in Godzilla vs. Kong, the Kong War was not just Godzilla, meaning the Big G, as that is his name, much like Dagon is referring to that Titanus Gojira from the start of Godzilla 2014, or how each of Ghidorah's 3 heads has its own individual names, Kiki, Nee, and Kevin. Which is why for the remainder of this video, for simple point of clarification and simplicity, when we refer to Godzilla, that is referring to the individual Godzilla. That is referring to our Godzilla. Because the terms are kind of used interchangeably by us as a community, and we kind of need to stop that because it's kind of confusing. When we are referring to the species as a whole, we will be saying Titanus Gojira, or Godzilla species, or some variation of that. Because again, it's gonna get confusing otherwise. Specifically when it comes to the Titanus Gojira and the Kong War, now we will use kind of Kong interchangeably with Kongs and Great Apes, because they are also called Kong, so again, that's weird, because Kong is, again, that's that thing. The Great Apes, the Titanus Gojira versus the Great Apes War. There, better. The axes, on their own, not only disprove the idea that Godzilla is a standalone entity of his own separate subspecies or superspecies, but also that Godzilla's atomic breath is unique to him. Even disregarding the statement that Dagon had similar powers, if not the same powers as our Godzilla, the Titanus Gojira's corpse used to create the spike axes shows, at bare minimum, 2 others of the Titanus Gojira species possess the atomic breath, or at least some variation, potentially less powerful. Because the spike axes are designed specifically to counter this ability. Obviously, one to create the axes themselves, and a second, and potentially even third, to inform the Great Apes of this ability Godzilla's kind possesses. Some people have said that they have the atomic pulse, and that Godzilla's atomic breath is a more refined version of it. However, the idea of it being an atomic pulse being blocked by the axe makes absolutely no sense. It would be like if Captain America tried to block a, 3-ton TNT explosion with just his shield. It's only gonna block part of his body, and the rest of him is gonna get blasted by concussive force. The axe is there to deal with a narrow, focused beam, as we see in Godzilla vs. Kong, where he blocks Godzilla's atomic ray. And as we see in Godzilla Kong the New Empire, the axe is completely useless against Shimo's frostbite breath. And with the Kong's seeming habit of crafting weapons unique to individual titans to counter their abilities, this would track with the Gojira spike axes, designed specifically to counter the atomic breath. The axe also draws on inner earth energy, meaning this is not a unique power just to Godzilla. Though again, in Godzilla's case, it could be Godzilla is a heavily atypical example and is significantly stronger than his brethren, or has simply refined this ability to a far greater degree. To even something as he is just simply built different, or his own actions to purposely empower himself through consumption of other enemies. As we have seen with Tiamat, he was able to consume part of her DNA, acquire many of her abilities, and further strengthen himself. For lack of a better term, Godzilla may have historically gone through an anime training arc to become the absolute giga unit we know him as today. Hence, furthering that idea that Legendary wants him to be one specific example of his kind, and focusing on him being a singular example. As a big fan of TVTropes.com, and having a chronic addiction to that website, there is a term called conservation of ninjutsu. The more of a certain thing there are, the less imposing it becomes. One ninja is an insurmountable enemy for the protagonist, but when you throw 50 ninjas at a person in a game, well, or even just any piece of media in general, they're not going to be a problem, they're just a pushover. By having one focused Godzilla, it allows Godzilla to, in story, be more powerful. Because if one Godzilla is this powerful, imagine what 2, 3, or even 4 of them would be capable of doing when it comes to Titanus Gojira species. even if they are slightly weaker than our Godzilla, it would still make Godzilla's strength seem to pale in comparison by being less special, less unique. Next is, despite Godzilla being an apex predator naturally, he is completely incapable of a singular kaiju war on all of the great apes. He is more than a match one-on-one and possibly even one-on-2 or 3 for any of the great apes. He is significantly stronger, he has the natural armoring, the atomic ray, and his natural claws offer a far better weapon than just the Kong's punch capabilities. However, the idea presented by people in favor of the idea that Godzilla is the only one of his kind with regards to this Toho supposed retcon is Godzilla would have been on his own fighting all of the Kongs. Or, the inverse, Godzilla's kind, or the Godzilla look-alike kind, which is, again, doesn't exist, would have been fighting the Kongs without atomic breath, which, again, doesn't make sense because why would the axes have existed? And even without the atomic breath, this supposed look-alike Titanus Gojira kind would still prove the superior to the Kongs naturally, because, again, natural armoring, natural claws, better offenses. But that would also mean that Godzilla wouldn't really have any investment in the ancient war with the Kongs, so why would his ancient rival be Scar King? Again, a lot of these things kind of just there to rage bait, and if you think about them for more than 4 seconds, none of them make sense. They all entirely conflict. The reason why I say this, and that Godzilla would not have been able to one kaiju army the entirety of the Kong species, is despite the fact that Kong, King Kong, or Kong as he's known, the big monkey, was able to relatively hold his own against Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Kong, this is not as impressive as we truly think it is. Kong himself is actually very young. He was about 100 feet tall when it came to Kong Skull Island, which was set in the 70s, and about 50 years later, he is 340 feet tall. Meaning he's probably not more than 200 years old, and if that, maybe not even 100 years old. Whereas we see the other great apes in Godzilla Kong New Empire, these are thousands of years old apes. They have much more vast combat experience fighting other titans, likely having fought in the war against the Titanus Gojiras in the past. All of these are things that Kong lacks. Godzilla is more than a physical match for any singular member of the great ape species. He possesses, again, vastly better combat experience, and has a naturally more combat-oriented physique. His claws, his tail, his spikes, the atomic breath. But Kong was able to relatively 1v1 him with a direct specific counter in the Godzilla Spike Axe, or the Gojira Spike Axe, which was there to counter the atomic ray. However, even then, the win, quote-unquote, against Godzilla in Hong Kong is nowhere near as impressive as it seems at first glance. Godzilla had won and been hunting all over the Earth, hunting down Apex Cybernetics facilities, then bored his way into the inner Earth with his atomic breath, and then fought Kong. He was fighting pretty much at a somewhat drained capacity, whereas Kong was basically completely fresh and using a direct counter to him. If Godzilla was at full, no chance. But this does show that a Kong with a Gojira Spike Axe can prove a relative match for a Godzilla, or at least for a Gojira species, meaning if you had multiple Kongs with their own axes to counter the atomic ray, a Titanus Gojira would not have as easy a time fighting a group of them as they would one-on-one, making the entire idea that, again, it was Godzilla versus all of them kind of a bit moot. And again, if the Titanus Gojira is not the same species as Godzilla, why would they need the axes if they don't have the atomic ray? And even then again, Godzilla did in the end beat Kong. Kong only won because he got a lucky cheap shot, and again, Godzilla was weakened. After that, Godzilla beat him in the second round, meaning that in the end, Godzilla had 2 wins versus Kong with 1. As much as I love Godzilla and as strong as he is, we even directly see in Godzilla Kong the New Empire, he needs to power up before fighting an army of Kongs on his own. That's the reason he goes on the Tiamat hunting side quest. He knows he can't 1v infinity them, which is perhaps the biggest nail in that entire idea coffin. In this case, he has to go one-on-one, or well, one on infinity. Before, he had the backup from the rest of the Titanus Gojira species. So while he is not a standalone entity, he is a very atypical example of his kind, significantly more powerful than them, as he is able to fend off relatively easily the supposed natural, perfectly evolved counter to his species, the Muto Prime, something that Dagon was not able to do. Now, yes, Godzilla did have help in Godzilla Aftershocks, however, this is because the Orca was the plot device for Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and that needed to be introduced and established in the story. Without that, do you really think Godzilla would have been as, kind of made out to be a bit of a wimp in that movie? In that comic? Probably not. Because again, the Muto Prime has to leave repeatedly when fighting Godzilla. And further supporting that they do predate on the Titanus Gojira species is their abilities are there to mitigate the atomic capabilities of the species. The Muto's naturally evolved armor is there to direct and deflect the atomic energy away from their bodies, minimizing damage. However, it is still noted with Godzilla's atomic ray, it still causes notable damage. Their natural EMP field is designed to suppress and dampen the atomic spark that allows Godzilla and the Titanus Gojira species to generate the atomic ray. However, Godzilla is able to power through this because he is significantly more powerful. Their suppression capabilities don't work as well on him. To a significantly weaker member of his kind, this would likely stop it altogether, and leave them significantly less able to fight, as even though a Titanus Gojira is the superior of a Muto in physical combat, the Muto are capable of inflicting more severe damage on them with their much longer legs, capable of generating more force to pierce the body. And their naturally armored body is capable of absorbing hits better than Godzilla's scales. And, as it turns out, a weaker predecessor to the atomic breath has already existed. True Giga Chads will remember our 8th video covering Godzilla's atomic ray variations, in this case being the incandescent light. This was the natural predecessor to Godzilla's atomic ray in the original Toho movies, in the original Gojira, and Godzilla Raids Again. It was more of a superheated stream of radiation that would cause things to spontaneously burst into flames. It was nowhere near as powerful as what is effectively a directional nuclear explosion that the atomic ray eventually became. Something like this would be much more effectively blocked by Muto's defenses and Muto's suppression capabilities. Something that they were likely evolved to deal with, as even the vastly improved and up-armored form of the Muto Prime does take not insignificant damage from Godzilla's atomic ray. Something that it was supposedly perfectly evolved to counter the species of, which might needed to resort to the sonic scream in order to stop Godzilla from utilizing the atomic breath, because the armor couldn't handle it. All of that is to say, Godzilla is very much still part of a species. The Titanus Gojira kind is still canon, and we simply have not understood all of what was said there. Toho wants Godzilla to be the focus, not just any Titanus Gojira, because he's the star. Adam Wingard has hinted that he has been taking cues from a lot of the other Godzilla movies, namely things like Son of Godzilla and Godzilla vs. Destroya, for upcoming elements of the MonsterVerse. While he didn't confirm or deny that Son of Godzilla or that there would be a junior or something like that, largely because, one, massive spoilers and things are not finished being hammered out yet, the simple fact that that suggestion is made when the supposed Godzilla is no longer part of a species claim is being touted is incompatible. And when it comes to the person making these movies and the content creators who constantly are trying to grow their audience base, I'm gonna take one of those over the other 10 times out of 10. Because do you think that Toho would even allow that statement to be made if they did not want Godzilla to at least have, not been connected to another species? No. The answer is they wouldn't. That, and they have also said the next MonsterVerse movie will focus on Godzilla. The Inner Earth has been hardly explored by humanity. While I do think the Titanus Gojira population is relatively small, likely many of them died in battle with the Kongs, and their population is not able to as easily bounce back as the Kongs were capable of doing. And again, assuming combat with other Titans, assuming that they are similar to Godzilla in terms of disposition and being natural protectors, with some mildly aggressive tendencies when their territory is threatened, this would lead them to confrontation with other Titans. However, again, as Godzilla is, even despite being an atypical example of his kind and being significantly more powerful, he is shown to significantly outclass a lot of Titans by a very noticeable margin. The only Titans able to really equal him were an alien, were supposedly naturally evolved predators, a mechanical doppelganger fighting him when he was at like sub-half strength, the giant monkey utilizing a weapon specifically designed to counter him, while he was also still at half strength, more or less, and Shimo, a primordial super kaiju. This is likely why Mothra has gravitated towards him as the assistant partner, king of the monsters when it comes to protecting Earth. It is because he is the strongest of his kind. And as we've seen from most of the Titans, they're actually relatively peaceful creatures. The Kongs, when Scar King is not at the helm, are relatively peaceful, relatively civil. Titans like Shimo and Mothra, they don't want to fight. They are docile, they take care of the planet, and they just simply exist. And Godzilla is also largely the same. He only gets aggressive when his territory is threatened or when other Titans are trying to usurp him. Keeping in mind, the whole of Earth is his territory. He is naturally protective. The only out-and-out aggressive hostile kaiju we have seen throughout the entire series are the Skull Devil, Tiamat, Ghidorah, Scar King, and the Muto Prime. With Muto Prime and the Skull Devil being driven by biological compulsions, one with the Muto Prime being to breed and propagate its species, and the Skull Devil being simply its hyper-voracious appetite, needing it to constantly consume, driving it into conflict with other organisms. Ghidorah being an alien who came to Earth specifically to conquer it, and Scar King being a notable exception and insane for wanting to take over the Earth. Only Tiamat is really naturally aggressive when it comes to Earth-born creatures specifically. We also don't know exactly how the original Titanus Gojira Great Ape conflict started. And seeing as Godzilla did not wipe out all of them in the Inner Earth and simply allowed Scar King to live, albeit imprisoned, shows despite the kind of popular conception of Godzilla as this, bloodthirsty, aggressive slayer of other Titans, he's actually very merciful and actually relatively docile. He doesn't want to go and destroy all the other Titans. He is simply doing what is in the best interest of protecting Earth, and again, is more than willing to make peace. His aggressiveness is simply a form of protectiveness. Which would mean, despite his aggressive tendencies, this could mean the Titanus Gojira population is also similarly peaceful, much like the Kongs are naturally. This could perhaps actually be the origin of why Godzilla is so aggressively protective. He is protecting his kind. Or there are certain individuals that are more aggressively protective of the Titanus Gojira species. But that is just speculation on my part. Or, his kind could all be dead and he's just a depresso espresso kaiju, looking for the opportunity to crush the skulls of anything that even threatened his kind in the past. And that the next MonsterVerse big bad did the Goji clan massacre like some kaiju-sized Itachi. Yes, I've been rewatching Naruto. Shut up. If it was a bit more, hostile or aggressive in this video, it is largely because of all the doomer takes I've seen on this topic, and the flaming of MonsterVerse retcons, because I am a very, very big opponent of retcons as a whole. Some of them on MonsterVerse are pretty bad, and it's been in a lot of my comments about, no, the retcon about the MonsterVerse and Titanus Gojira. It's kind of become something I wanted to address myself because, well, there is a lot of misinformation out there, and RageBait does do a good job of getting people to turn their brains off. I think it is important we actually look at everything that is being presented, look at the origin of a lot of the retcons, see what is real, what isn't, and actually understand what the problems are and what are not the problems. Because YouTubers, they're going to YouTube and exaggerate stuff to look at things in the worst possible way. It's unfortunately what generates the most views. It's why channels like this that focus more on the positive aspects of something don't really grow as well. They just simply don't generate clicks and they don't really generate comments. So I think that's really going to be all for today. Thank you for watching. Comment your thoughts below. That really is what helps drive a lot of these videos being pushed out. And we need to destroy the doomer takes with the positive takes. Get the ship righted. And I'm always happy to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Leave a like and subscribe for more. I will see you guys next time. I've been Max Allo. Long live Kaiju King.